Hello and welcome to part 2 of this Fender Bassman amplifier that we're servicing at the moment. In part 1, if you remember, we had the wrong tubes in this, and we had to set the mains voltage to 240 volts and sort out all the bias and put the correct tubes in, so forth. So what we're going to do in part 2 now, we're going to recap this amp and sort out any other problems. So I've got a big bag of capacitors here from Modulus Amplification, and you can find the link to the Modulus website amongst the links on my channel at the top of the page where it says and more links, or more links. So the first thing we're going to tackle is these caps under this doghouse. So we've got 4 screws to take off here, and we're going to change these 2 caps. 100 microfarad at 350, 100 microfarad at 350 is there, they're wide in series. And then we've got 2 47s at 350, they're also wide in series. So these will give a total of 50 microfarad wide in series at 700 volts working. I'm also going to change these resistors here because they're just those crappy half-watt ones. In fact, I'm questioning if they're even half a watt. Very small. So I'm going to change those for 1 watt carbon films, which is what they're carbon films, but obviously they're not 1 watt. So these IC capacitors are known to be not very good, and Fender did have a bad batch of these. They were failing pretty rapidly. These obviously aren't from a bad batch, but they have been in here 20 years or more, at least 20 years, so they need to be changed. There we go. So we've got the screws out, and this board just lifts up. As you can see, and we just need to look underneath this board as well, just to check it. That all looks in good order. You can't see it. Don't want to bend it over too far because of the screws in the wires going in there, but that's all in good order. Just move the camera over here, and if we just lift up now, we can have a closer look at this board. Just get in a bit there. Ooh. Put some big glasses on to look at that. That looks okay. Right, so we'll get these caps out and get the new ones in. Right, I've got the caps in, and we've got the 1 watt 220k resistors in there, so he's all done. Right, so I'm just going to run this amp up now I've done these caps in the doghouse, just to make sure there's no problems before we start on the rest of the amp. And taking this board out might not be an easy task, looking at it. But all seems to be running okay. So up to about 160 volts now on the variac. We're just bringing these caps up steady. Right, we've got this amp up to full voltage now, and it's running quite nicely with those new caps in. But we're going to have to get this board out and change these other IC caps. So now this is running okay, we can shut it down. We'll let it cool down and then take the tubes out again, and check the capacitors have got no voltage in them. And then we're going to look at changing these other capacitors. Right, we're just going to do a quick test on these 22 microfarad 500 volt working capacitors. So this amp's got a GZ34 rectifier tube, which is like a slow start. in other words, when you switch this amp on, you don't get the full voltage through it before the tubes conduct. So what this GZ34 does, as it warms up, it delivers more and more voltage. By the time it's warmed up and it's running its full voltage, the tubes have already begun to absorb the voltage and draw current. These three preamp tubes see much less voltage, obviously, than the output tubes. So by the time this amp's running properly, there's probably maybe 300 volts on this cap, and probably, you know, 200 on these. So the 500 volts working. So most people would think, whoa, that's they're pretty high for that. So perhaps we're recapping this, we could put something less in it, like a 450. And here I've got some 450 capacitors, 450 volt working, 22 microfarad. So let's run this up now. I've took all the tubes out except for the rectifier tube. So let's run this amp up and just watch the meter. And you can see the voltage will, as the tube warms up, you'll see the voltage coming up there. Now the voltage now has reached 483 volts. We just put the variac up to 240. Remember, the mains voltage in the UK is 240, so 488 volts we've got on there. Now I can hear people saying, yeah, but when you've got the preamp tubes in and they're drawing current, that voltage will be much lower than 500 volts. We can see there it's almost 500 volts. More importantly, it's more than 450 volts. And so what's the problem? Well, the problem is, let's just say the rectifier tube blows. So the guy goes out and gets one of those plug-in solid state diode ones. So he plugs that in. That 490 volts it's up to now that we can see, when he switches this amp on, that 490 volts will hit those caps straight away. Now it will only hit them maybe for 20 seconds, and then it will start to fall, or maybe even 50 seconds, and then it will begin to drop. But that initial surge of voltage on there will be over 450 volts. So this amp needs 500 volt working capacitors on those three nodes, even though when the amp's running, it's running much lower than that. Right, I've got this Fender Bassman board out, and it's a bit tricky to get this board out, so you've got to make a few newts if you're doing this. It's not one of the easiest to get out, it's very compact in here. So what I've done is, and obviously you've got to decide which way you're going to take this board out. Are you going to fold it, I've got it folded out this way, are you going to fold it out the opposite way? Well, if you take it out the opposite way, you've got to take all the volume controls out, so that's this board, and you've got to take these four sockets out, and the pilot light as well, to get the board past that. So obviously it's simpler to get it out this way. So I've had to connect all the preamp wires from the tube sockets. Bit of a ball ache, but it's the only way to get it out. So I've made some notes about those, and I do that because otherwise I've got to go and start looking at the schematic and messing around, and it takes more time. It's easier just to and another tip you can do with these is, if you look on some of them, you can see I've just left a bit of the colour of the wire on there, and so that just gives you a bit of a reminder where they go. Now I've had to take off 2 or 3 wires on the output tubes, and I've had to take off some of the spade terminals. So these two feed the doghouse, they've had to come off, and there's 1 or 2 more here, and also these wires here which come down into here, which are the output transformer, and it's best to disconnect these because they come through a hole there. You can see them moving around, and you don't want to be pulling on those, so best just to disconnect those. So although they were long enough, you end up just keep utching them through, and then you pull the board and they get tight again. It's easier just to take them off. So we just took those off, and I've just made some notes of where they go. all these wires, and we should be able to get that back together comfortably in a relatively short space of time. So we've got to change these three capacitors here, these, and you can just go over the top. You can see those there, those three IC caps. And then we've got, and they are going to be a little bit tricky down there. You can see there's three more, and there, two of those at least are for the bias. So we really want to, I'm not those, that'll be those 10 microfarad at 100 volts. You perhaps can't see that on here, but there's two of those, and then there's a 22 at the back there. So we need to change those as well. So we're also going to change these coupling caps. We know this amp's at least 20 years old, if not more, so we want to get those out and change those. While we've got the board out, it makes sense to put some new ones in there. They're probably fine, but well, they are fine, but because I've tested them, but we might as well have some new ones in while the board's up, and then they're good for another 20 years. Right, let's get cracking. Let's get these out. Right, I've got all the caps in, and I've got the board down. I've got the all the spade connectors on there, and I've just got the tube sockets to wire up what wires we've taken off, wire on the speaker phono plugs there to put back on as well, but we're all in there. So we've replaced these capacitors here, we've replaced the coupling caps just as a precaution while we've got the board out, and we've replaced these three capacitors here, which were those IC caps. So now we've just got to wire up these sockets, and then we can power up. We'll just recheck the bias again because we've changed these caps and whatnot, but I can't see it being any different, but we'll check it again just to make doubly sure, and then we can get this back in its case and have a listen. Right, we've got this Bassman all back together. We're going to have a listen, but before we start, just want to say a little bit about the last video. So I caused a bit of controversy in the last video. This is a reissue Fender Bassman, obviously not an original one. I didn't make that clear in the video. I also didn't put it in the title, so I'm sorry for that. And secondly, a Fender Bassman, the original ones, did use 5881 tubes. This amp uses 6L6 GCs. Could you put 5881s in this amp? Yes, probably. You would probably have to alter the bias circuit to do it, unless you got a pair that drew quite a low current. But on the whole, a bit of a mix up there with the video, and one of the reasons for that is because we never see original Bassmans here in the UK. Very rare. I haven't seen one for 10 years. I mean, unless you go in shops where there's loads of vintage amps, you might see one, but they are quite rare, and I've actually never worked on one. And it was only when I actually went and looked at the schematic for the original one, which I then realised that there was, you know, they did have 5881s in originally, but these ones don't. But anyway, there a bit of confusion there, and it caused a bit of controversy, so I'm sorry for that. That wasn't my intention. It's just me being a bit of a plank again. Right, let's carry on with this demo. quite a nice bluesy tone, which is to be expected from one of these amps. So there we are, quick demo there. That's the Fender Bassman, all put back together. Fender Bassman Reissue, all put back together. Let's get that right. So that'll do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and you take care, and I'll see you all in another video. Bye bye for now.